This is not a drill. What happened in the early hours of Sunday, May 17th, 2026, is not a distant frontline skirmish that gets buried on page 7 of a news website. It is an event that Moscow residents will be talking about for years. An event that shook Putin's inner circle out of their beds. An event that forced ordinary Russian citizens, people who have spent 4 years watching this war happen to someone else, somewhere else, far away in Ukraine, to suddenly realize that the war had come home. And it came home hard. Over 1,000 Ukrainian drones struck Russian territory in a single 24-hour period. They penetrated 4 rings of air defense. They reached Moscow itself. They lit up an oil refinery. They sent debris crashing onto the grounds of Russia's busiest airport. And they filled the Moscow night sky with explosions that residents desperately tried to film on their phones, despite it being technically illegal to do so. The hunters became the hunted. Today I want to walk you through exactly what happened, why it happened, and what it means for where this war goes from here. Because what I am going to show you goes several layers deeper than anything the mainstream coverage has addressed. Stay with me. If you are watching Echo Media for the first time, subscribe now. This channel exists for one reason: to go where the mainstream analysis will not. Before we get into Moscow, we need to go back to what triggered it. Because this strike did not come out of nowhere. Starting on May 13th and escalating through May 14th, Russia launched what Ukrainian Air Force officials described as the largest aerial barrage on Ukraine in a 2-day period since the full-scale invasion began in 2022. Ukraine's president stated that Russia fired more than 1,560 drones against Ukrainian population centers in 48 hours alone, alongside 56 missiles overnight. 1,560 drones. Not in a week, not in a month, in 2 days. These were not flying over empty fields. They were flying over homes. A cruise missile struck a 9-story corner apartment building in Kyiv's Darnitsia neighborhood during the largest Russian barrage of the full-scale invasion. Emergency workers spent more than a day digging through the rubble. 24 civilians confirmed dead, including 3 teenagers, born in 2008, 2010, and 2013. They never made it to adulthood. One minute they were asleep in their apartment. The next minute they were buried under concrete because Vladimir Putin had spent weeks stockpiling drones and missiles and then deliberately timed the strike for maximum international visibility. That is not a war crime that gets absorbed into diplomatic language. That is a massacre. And Ukraine's military had already started planning the response before the dust settled. Here is what Putin forgot in May of 2026 that he should have remembered from 2022. Ukraine has spent 4 years building the capacity to reach anywhere inside Russia with a drone swarm that no air defense architecture on Earth was designed to stop at this scale. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine's domestic defense industry has grown by more than 50 times. Ukraine now produces more than 50% of the weapons it deploys on the front line, with most long-range strike capabilities developed entirely without Western hardware. This is not 2022 Ukraine absorbing punishment while waiting for someone to give it permission to fight back. The instruction to prepare what Zelensky called possible formats for a response went out. The planning started. And hours after Russia's 48-hour bombardment of Ukrainian cities concluded, the response was already in the air. Over 1,000 drones in 24 hours. Inside Russia, something that had never happened at this scale since the war began. And Russia's own defense ministry confirmed that number, which means it is almost certainly the floor, not the ceiling. Now let me take you inside Moscow on the night of May 16th going into May 17th. Because what unfolded in those hours is something the Russian state media machine is desperately trying to reframe, downplay, and bury. We are not going to let that happen. We are going to go through this target by target and explain not just what burned, but why each target was chosen and what the strategic logic behind the selection tells us. Videos began circulating on social media after 3 a.m. local time, showing simultaneous flashes across multiple Moscow districts. Reports came in from Khimki, Zelenogratsk, drone activity near Sheremetyevo airport, and blasts in central Moscow itself. Khimki is not some remote industrial zone. It is a densely populated Moscow suburb where regular Russian families live, the kind of place where people had spent 4 years assuming the war was something they watched on television. A woman was killed after a drone struck a private home there. 4 people were injured when drones damaged residential blocks in the western town of Istra. But here is where the mainstream coverage stops short, at the human cost and the spectacle. Let me tell you what Ukraine actually hit, because Ukraine's own security service confirmed the target list afterward with complete transparency. 2 oil pumping facilities, an oil refinery, and the Angstrom plant. Read that last one again. The Angstrom plant. That is a facility supplying semiconductors, the microchips that go into Russian weapons systems, guidance electronics, communication equipment, targeting systems. Ukraine did not just hit fuel storage on the night of May 17th. Ukraine hit the manufacturing supply chain of Russia's ability to keep producing the weapons it has been using to bomb Ukrainian cities. That level of strategic targeting precision has received almost no serious coverage in mainstream Western media. It should be the headline. The Shelkovo oil terminal, part of the main petroleum pipeline system supplying Moscow, caught fire from a drone strike, sending massive plumes of black smoke visible from the center of the city. And then there was Sheremetyevo, Russia's largest airport, the gateway to Moscow for the world. Airport officials confirmed UAV debris on airport grounds. They stated there was no threat to passenger areas. Notice how carefully that statement was worded. Not that nothing was hit, not that everything was fine, just that the core passenger areas survived. That is Kremlin-adjacent damage control language. Anyone paying attention can read exactly what it means. In Moscow itself, at least 12 people were wounded near the entrance to the capital's oil refinery in the Kapotnya district. Moscow Oblast governor confirmed at least 3 killed across multiple districts. And 1 Indian national died in the strike, a foreign citizen working in Russia, killed by a Ukrainian drone in the Moscow region. That is a headline that travels around the world instantly. No state media apparatus can contain it. Now here is where the story gets genuinely extraordinary, because the part that sent the deepest panic through Moscow's neighborhoods was not just what Ukraine hit. It was what Russia's own air defense systems did in the chaos of trying to stop the swarm. Russia's defense ministry stated it intercepted more than 556 drones overnight. Moscow's mayor said air defenses shot down over 120 heading for the city, over a densely populated metropolitan area. Intercepted projectiles do not disappear. The debris falls on houses, on streets, on apartment buildings. Russian anti-aircraft missiles intercepting Ukrainian drones, and then the wreckage of both raining down on the neighborhoods below. That specific nightmare is exactly what Putin's 4 rings of air defense were designed to prevent. On the night of May 17, 2026, they could not prevent it, not even close. The Institute for the Study of War's assessment was devastating in its implications. 4 years into this conflict, with full knowledge of Ukraine's growing drone swarm capability, Russia has still not built the kind of distributed, cost-effective point defense network that would actually stop an attack at this scale. What Russia has instead are expensive interceptor missiles being fired in enormous quantities against cheap Ukrainian drones. A cost-exchange ratio that bleeds the Russian defense budget with every single engagement, and that Ukraine is deliberately and methodically exploiting. Now let us talk about the information war dimension, because this is the layer that most analysis completely misses. For 4 years, Russia's state media machine has been running one of the most coordinated information operations in modern history. Every Ukrainian strike on Russian soil gets minimized. Every Russian setback becomes a tactical regrouping. Every burning refinery becomes a fire that was quickly contained with no damage to key infrastructure. And for the most part, that machine has worked. On the Russian domestic audience without access to independent media. On the segment of the population that genuinely believes its government. But on the night of May 17, 2026, something cracked. Loudly enough that even Russia's own pro-war bloggers could not pretend it was not there. Here is what state media told Russians about the attack. Russian air defenses shot down more than 1,000 drones. Interception numbers framed as heroic success. Not what got through. Not what burned. not what killed people, not what landed on the grounds of Sheremetyevo, just the interception count, presented as evidence of effective defense. We shot down 1,000 drones. That sounds like a victory until you ask the obvious follow-up question. If you shot down 1,000 drones, why is Moscow's oil terminal on fire? Why are houses burning in Kyiv? Why is there debris on the grounds of Russia's largest airport? The numbers describe a defense system that was overwhelmed, not one that succeeded. And Moscow residents could see it with their own eyes. This is the detail that made May 17th different from every previous strike on Russian territory. Because Moscow does not get attacked often, most residents did not know, or did not think about, the laws that technically prohibit filming and publishing footage of drone strikes inside Russia. When you see fire in the sky above your apartment building at 3 a.m., you do not consult state media guidelines. You grab your phone, you film, because you are terrified and you want someone to know what is happening. Hundreds of videos, possibly thousands, flooded Telegram channels, social media, and international news feeds within hours. The world saw what Moscow looked like that night, and no amount of state media spin could unring that bell. Then came the moment that genuinely altered the dynamics of Russia's domestic information space. The pro-war bloggers, the online personalities who have spent years cheerleading the invasion, defending every military failure, providing the Kremlin with an unofficial propaganda layer that state television cannot reach, started breaking ranks. They could not look at footage of burning oil terminals, houses on fire in Kyiv, and debris on Sheremetyevo's grounds, and tell their followers with a straight face that everything had been repelled and nothing was damaged. Their audiences had eyes. They had seen the same videos. The credibility of the pro-war blogger ecosystem depends on at least a minimal connection to observable reality. On the night of May 17th, observable reality was on fire. An expert cited by the Associated Press described the attack as bringing home, unmistakably, the fact that Ukraine has the capacity to strike at very significant scale at or around the Russian capital. That phrase, bringing home, is doing diplomatic understatement work. What it actually means is this: the foundational psychological contract that Putin has maintained with the Russian population since February 2022, the promise that the war stays over there, that Moscow stays safe, that Russian civilians do not experience what Ukrainian civilians experience, that contract was violated on the night of May 17th in the most visible, most documented, most impossible to deny way imaginable. A separate analyst cited by AP described a darkening cloud of anxiety developing over Russia over the past several months. Combining recent battlefield setbacks, a deteriorating domestic economic situation, and the Kremlin's intensifying internet crackdown, a darkening cloud of anxiety. That is the expert formulation. The plain language is simpler. Russians are scared in a way they have never been scared before. And the government they trusted to keep them safe is telling them everything is fine, while their neighbors film burning buildings from their apartment windows. The commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces posted a message after the strike addressed specifically to residents of Patriarch's Ponds, one of Moscow's most exclusive neighborhoods, where Russia's oligarchs and political elite live behind security gates. His message was simple: the unilateral subscription to a quiet life in this area has been canceled. That message was not written for the international press. It was written directly for the people who fund this war, who profit from this war, who have been insulated from its consequences since it began. And it landed exactly as intended. Here is the strategic conclusion that mainstream coverage keeps missing. May 17th was not simply the largest Ukrainian drone strike on Moscow in over a year. It was the most visible demonstration yet of something that has been building for 4 years. That Ukraine has industrialized its long-range strike capability to a degree that no Russian air defense architecture can reliably defeat at scale. 2 oil pumping facilities, a refinery, a semiconductor plant, debris on Russia's largest airport, houses burning in the suburbs, and Moscow's elite watching the sky light up outside their protected windows for the first time in this war. The Kremlin's response? Double down on the same strategy that produced the retaliation in the first place. Strike more Ukrainian cities. Invite more responses. Each exchange moves the cost of this war further inside Russia's borders and further into the daily lives of the Russian population that Putin needs to remain passive. The psychological tide of this conflict shifted on May 17, 2026, not because of the physical damage, significant as that was, but because of what the Russian population now knows that it cannot unknow. The war is not somewhere else. The war is in the sky above Khimki. The war is in the rubble of a building in Kapotnya. The war is in the smoke rising above Sheremetyevo. And the government telling them otherwise is the same government whose air defenses just rained debris onto their own neighborhoods while trying to stop it. If this analysis delivered the depth that a moment this significant demands, hit like, share this with someone who is only following the surface-level coverage of this war. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what comes next in this conflict will move fast, and the analysis that explains what it actually means will be here the moment it happens. Drop your assessment in the comments below. Does the psychological fracture in Russia's domestic information space matter strategically, or does it not move the needle on the Kremlin's decision-making? I read every comment. I want to know what you think.